Donald Trump's state visit is very important, very interesting, and should be very welcome. Of course, lots of people are complaining, but these are people essentially who are rejecting American democracy, an American democracy that gave Donald Trump a commanding majority, not just in the Electoral College, but in the personal vote and in the Congress, both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. He won a big majority. As he might say, he won bigly last November. And that's important in and of itself because sensible people respect American democracy, a constitution drawn out of the British Constitution, one that sought to perfect it and to have checks and balances along the way, checks and balances that are very real. And Donald Trump operates within that democratic framework. But more importantly than that, Donald Trump is genuinely, truly, ultimately democratic. And this is important because so much of modern politics isn't. That is to say, in both our countries, both in the United Kingdom and in the United States, there is a comfortable, complacent elite that has been used to power and doesn't like giving it up to those it mocks as being populist. But what Donald Trump has done is really important because it has reaffirmed American democracy. It has given the American people not only somebody they wanted, they get that, at least in theory, every 4 years, though sometimes they're disappointed, but somebody who actually wants to represent them and believes their views are normal and natural and ought to be implemented. Not somebody snooty who thinks that they know better, who thinks that an elite should guide the unwashed masses. Donald Trump isn't like that. He sees viscerally, clearly, the problems that America faces and understands why people were angry and wanted change. His votes came from the left behinds, from the people Hillary Clinton thought deplorable. And that's important because if a vast swathe of the country, any country, feels that its democracy takes no notice of it, then you will find that democracy itself is under threat. And so those people who attack Donald Trump on the grounds he's not democratic and that he's riding roughshod over the system fundamentally misunderstand what democracy is about. It is about representing what the people want, and Trump is doing that better than any of his most recent predecessors, whether Republican or Democrat. He understands what Americans want, what not necessarily very well off Americans want, what Americans who've never heard of Davos want. And this reasserts democracy, it shores up democracy, it protects democracy. And it's actually something we can learn from because it worries me that we have governments who are either hamstrung because of previous laws or because of the European Court of Human Rights or because of formally our membership of the European Union, who aren't able to do what the people who elect them want. And this is corrosive. It undermines faith in democracy itself. It's what encourages people to take to the streets. It's what gives support to somebody like Tommy Robinson, who has a criminal record that's worth looking up because it includes assault and mortgage fraud. It's not just about free speech. And following somebody with that sort of a record is not good for democracy. It is a risk to democracy. And so you need democratic politicians who are genuinely responsive. Now, that's point one. Trump is responsive. He talks the talk. He says the right thing. He explains why he's on the side of Americans, and then he makes things happen. And he makes things happen that everyone has said can't happen, said is impossible. You won't be able to do that. It's too difficult, or actually Americans won't like it, or it will breach their rights, or whatever it is. But he's done it, and it's worked. So in April, 91% decline in illegal migration across the Mexican border into the United States. This was what the people who voted for him wanted him to do. It is democracy in action. It is real, raw, red meat of democracy, rather than getting into office and say, well, I know I promised you all these things, but they've turned out to be a little bit difficult, so actually I'm not going to do them after all. So that's the first reason we should welcome Trump, is that he has actually rescued American democracy, by not going along with the polite elite, by upsetting them, by blowing raspberries at them, but doing what the people wanted. Because a strong American democracy is good for the world. On the world stage, similarly, he's got things done by doing what's in the interests of the American people, but sometimes very much in our interest too. American president after American president has pointed out that Europe has just piggybacked off America in terms of defense and security, not carried its weight, not paid its way, just allowed America to do it. Trump, by threatening all sorts of things, by threatening effectively to undermine NATO, has managed to get the NATO states to increase their expenditure. And that has made us and Europe and the world a safer place. We are much better positioned to face a threat from Russia now than we were in 2016, the first time Donald Trump was elected to be the President of the United States. More money is being spent, more armaments are being made. There is a better defensive plan against Russia if Russia continues to be a threat. And that would not have happened without Trump's undiplomatic diplomacy, by his blunt speaking and saying, look, if you don't do this, I'm not going to get the American taxpayer to go on funding you forever. It's not unpopular with his voters in America. It's also very popular with people here because we now feel more secure, or at any rate we should. He has got us to do what we needed to do by speaking frankly and clearly. And then there's the issue of freedom of speech. We've had ridiculous things going on in this country, but America was suffering from its own problems with freedom of speech. It's not just here that there was a problem. Actually, it was worse in America because the major online companies had decided that they would regulate what people were allowed to say. And essentially that meant they could say nice left-wing things, but tough-minded right-wing things would be closed down. Twitter was guilty of this, Facebook was guilty of this. It was a problem that faced social media. And Trump changed it. And what's so interesting is that once he'd won, corporate America changed with him. He used the influence of the presidency to make things happen. He didn't have a formal power to do this. He didn't pass any laws particularly to do this. Executive orders are not quite laws, then some in between status, but he didn't get Congress to legislate. He used the influence of his office to defend freedom of speech. And that benefits all of us. It benefits any of you listening to this discussion or joining in it or sending comments to me, friendly or unfriendly. I've never shied away from disagreement. He is a defender of freedom of speech globally, and freedom of speech is at the core of our freedoms and our constitutional settlement. Freedom of speech goes along with the rights of property, democracy, and the rule of law to create a solid and successful constitution, which we have here and which they have in the United States. And it wasn't being stopped by legislation in America, because they can't under the First Amendment. It was being stopped much more insidiously by self-censorship, by the political correctness of the social media world that was stopping people saying things. Now, you may say it's become a cesspit and it's all very rude and so on and so forth, but it's much better that it should be rude than it should be controlled, and that your views, if they're not approved, shouldn't be able to be heard. Because actually governments don't always get it right. Big corporations don't always get it right. They don't judge correctly what views are good and what views are evil. And they stop conversation. And by stopping conversation, you can sometimes stop the exposure of evil. So free speech is worth the risk of some unpleasant things being done. So Trump, restoration of democracy, belief in democracy, restoration of NATO, belief in security, and the revitalization and restoration of freedom of speech. These are three big reasons to welcome him. He's also, as it happens, an Anglophile. He loves the royal family. He has an affection for England and a deep affection for Scotland. He thinks of this country as being friendly and well disposed to him. But I do have another reason for being delighted that Donald Trump's coming. It's simply that it annoys all the most tiresome, priggish people, especially letter writers to the Times. Now, I have to look at these today because the priggishness of Mr. Power, of Miss Desmond of Mr. Haig, Miss Richardson, and Mr. Freeman are quite remarkable. One of them is going to turn his back on President Trump. Well, let me just say this to him. Mr. Trump won't care. You can turn your back to a blank wall for all he cares. It won't make any difference to the success of his visit. He will be welcomed by all the king's horses and all the king's men, and your wonderful priggishness will be looked at by people like me in the Times and will think, oh, good, let's have another state visit from Donald Trump, just so that we can wind up, what is he called? I think Mr. Freeman of North Crawley, Buckinghamshire. I bet he votes Liberal Democrat.